Welcome friends to this third lecture of week 5 of this NPTEL online certification course of environmental soil chemistry, and in this week we are discussing about the ion exchange processes in soil. So, before starting the new topic for this lecture, I would just like to review whatever we have covered in past two lectures in very briefly. So, we have started with the definition of the ion exchange process, and then we have talked about the what are the sources of cation exchange in soils as well as what are the sources of anion exchange in soils. And from there we have defined the term ion exchange, and we know that it is a basically broad term which encompasses both cation exchange capacity and anion exchange capacity. Then we have seen these two pictures of two different soils, soil A and soil B, differing in their cation exchange capacity based on the magnitude of negative charge generated on their surface, in the clay surface. Then we have focused on the cation exchange capacity, and we have discussed about the what are the units of the cation exchange capacity and how this cation exchange capacity can be an indicator of soil quality. So, also we have discussed about the methods of determining the cation exchange capacity. We have talked about the buffer method as well as the unbuffer method, and remember the buffer method always gives the exaggregated or potential cation exchange capacity, whereas the effective cation exchange capacity can be measured using the unbuffered method. Now, then we have talked about the distillation method of ammonia, of measuring the determining cation exchange capacity, and then sodium saturation method. We have talked about the briefly the principle of how steps for determining the CEC in the laboratory and how we can calculate soil CEC from the lab data. There are two ways we can calculate based on the individual ion concentration or based on the displaced ammonium ion by using another potassium containing solution. And I have shown you how to calculate the cation exchange capacity based on the individual cations, and how to convert the values into centimole charge per kg of soil. And so, these two methods we have discussed in our last lectures. And I have also showed you the distillation method in the laboratory, how we can do that and what are the reactions which are involved. Remember, in the distillation method, basically this is using a buffer. It is a kind of a buffer method where we are adding the neutral normal ammonium acetate solution into the soil, which basically which dissociates to produce the ammonium ion. This ammonium ion replaces the the adsorbed iron in the surface, in the soil surface, and these ammonia get converted to these ammonium ion get converted to the ammonia in the presence of magnesium oxides. So, and these ammonia basically is absorbed in excess amount of acids, and the unreacted acid is basically measured by backtitrated with the standard alkali. Then we have talked about the relationship between the pH and CEC. Remember that CEC increases with the soil pH, and the permanent charge of 2:1 type of soil basically and pH dependent charge of humus and allophane and some 1:1 type of clay hold exchangeable ions. Then we have talked about what are the major exchangeable cations in the field soils. Remember that calcium, magnesium, sodium dominate in the low rainfall areas, whereas the iron, aluminum and complex aluminum hydroxy ions and H plus are more prominent in humid regions. Then I have showed you the table how this concentration of different cation varies depending on different climatic regions, and what is the implication of cation exchange and nutrient exchange, nutrient content of the soil we have also discussed. We have also discussed about the anion adsorption mechanism. So, I showed you how one anion can replace another anion reversibly in a soil colloid. Then we have talked about the characteristics of ion exchange, what are the selectivity, order of the selectivity of different cations for getting adsorbed onto the clay surface based on their hydrated radius, and how valency can be an important factor for selecting the particular cation and determining their affinity for adsorption onto the clay surface. We have also discussed, remember, aluminum always shows the higher affinity than sodium. Then we have talked about the how polarization can also affect the cation exchange. We have discussed. Now we have started with the cation exchange capacity based on the mineral structure. So we started with that, and I showed you that kaolinite, basically external exchange sites are, in case of kaolinite, external exchange sites are present and rate of ion exchange is rapid, and in case of 2:1 type of clay minerals we have also discussed. So I also showed you the how the CEC can vary from one soil to another soil. Remember, always soil humus has the highest cation exchange capacity, followed by vermiculite, smectite, and then kaolinite and iron aluminum oxides. Whatever cation exchange capacity you can see in iron aluminum oxides and 1:1 type of clay like kaolinite is basically pH dependent charge, due to the pH dependent charge. And then I showed you how addition of organic matter at different pH can increase the cation exchange capacity. Obviously, as we are adding the organic matter, increasing the pH, the ionization of the different aromatic hydroxyl group as well as aromatic carboxylic groups are more as well, and as a result there is more cation exchange capacity due to the more generation of negative charges. Then I showed you how the CEC of secondary soil minerals varies from one clay mineral to another clay mineral. In case of kaolinite it is the lowest, in case of talc it is also very less, and in case of trioctahedral vermiculite it is highest, 100 to 200 centimole per kg. Now, then we have talked about why in case of kaolinite the CEC is low. Now, in case of kaolinite, remember, the negative charge generation is only pH dependent, and only if there some few impurity are present, then only you can see some amount of negative charge generated in the clay mineral in kaolinite, which is around less than 2 centimole charge per kg. As pure kaolinite has very less isomorphic substitution, and interlayer space is also very inaccessible due to the presence of strong hydrogen bonding between the adjacent layers. And then I showed you the figure of kaolinite structure, and you can see that there is a strong hydrogen bonding occurs in between these hydroxyl layer as well as the adjacent oxygen atomic layer of the this hydroxyl layer basically comes from the aluminum octahedron sheet, whereas this at oxygen plane basically represents the basal oxygen of silica tetrahedral layer. So, in between these there is generation of the strong hydrogen bonding, and as a result the d axis spacing or interlayer space is very low. So, as a result there is no space for adsorption of cations. Whatever cations can adsorb in case of kaolinite in the edges, they are basically adsorbed in the edges because of the negative charge generated due to the pH dependent charge. Then we talked about the vermiculite. Remember, vermiculite, dioctahedral vermiculite, where has more layer charge than smectite, but it has less CEC due to the presence of K plus in the interlayer, and the K plus is very, the potassium ion is very small ion which is snugly fitted into the interlayer space, and as compared to the dioctahedral vermiculite, the trioctahedral vermiculite has calcium and magnesium in the interlayer. So, more CEC than dioctahedral, as these ions have no restriction for the cation exchange. So, dioctahedral vermiculite always shows higher CEC in the range of 100 to 200 centimole charge per kg. So, in case of vermiculite, it has the highest cation exchange capacity of all clays and less swelling capacity than smectite, but more than that of kaolinite. Obviously, due to the high cation exchange capacity, it is nutrient rich and it is stable under low pH condition. Now, in case of montmorillonite, it has the higher CEC due to substantial isomorphic substitution and fully expanded interlayers. There is more space for adsorption of cations. In case of mica, which is a potassium bearing minerals, they have more layer charge than vermiculite, but lower CEC due to the presence of potassium ions in the interlayer space. This potassium ion in the interlayer space basically snugly fitted. You can see here these two pictures. The first picture shows the dioctahedral mica, which is muscovite, and the second picture is showing the trioctahedral mica, which is basically trioctahedral mica like phlogoptite, and in both cases the interlayer space is basically occupied by very small potassium ion, and as a result of that there is you can see here these purple color balls are basically these potassium ions which are very small, and as a result the interlayer space is also very limited in both these two conditions, and this is the result, and as a result the interlayer space which is available for cation exchange is almost negligible. So, that is why in case of mica the CEC is low due to the presence of this interlayer potassium. So, if we go ahead and see the structure of illite, we know that it is a fine grained of mica, it is basically weathering product of mica. So, in case of illite, the isomorphous substitution occurs in the tetrahedral sheet, and as a result of that the negative charge which is generated in this structure basically satisfied by this small potassium ion in the interlayer space. So, again it is producing very collapsed structure, and so that is why illite is a non-expanding type of mineral, non-expanding type 2:1 type of mineral, and as a result of that the CEC also very limited in case of illite. So, the potassium is tightly bound in between the two layers, giving only d axis spacing of 1 nanometer or 10 angstrom. As a result of that there is very less space available for cation exchange. So, if we move ahead and see the structure of the chloride, you know that in the interlayer space there is a presence of hydroxide. So, due to the presence of this hydroxide sheet, now it could be either magnesium hydroxide. When it is magnesium hydroxide, then we call it brucite layer, and when it is aluminum hydroxide, we call it gibbsite layer. So, depending on whether brucite or gibbsite is present, irrespective of the presence of this brucite and gibbsite, remember the interlayer space is totally collapsed, because the interlayer space is totally occupied by this hydroxy sheet and producing a locked structure. It is not a collapsed structure per se, but it is a locked structure. As a result of the locked structure, there is no space available for external cations to occupy or getting adsorbed into the clay surface. So, as a result of that, the chloride also although in the chloride there is isomorphous substitution, as you can see in both tetrahedral sheet as well as in octahedral sheet. However, due to the lock structure, because of this magnesium aluminum hydroxide sheet, they do not show any substantial cation exchange capacity. So, we know about the 12 soil orders, and based on the minerals which are dominant in different soil orders, obviously these different soil orders also show the variation in their cation exchange capacity, because individual soil order is dominated by a specific type of mineral. For example, vertisol. In case of vertisol, it is dominated by basically smectite or montmorillonite. In case of oxysols, it is mainly dominated by the iron and aluminum oxide. So on in for different types of soil, the clay mineralogy varies, and accordingly their CEC also varies. So, as you can see here in this table, I have shown here the common range of CEC in centimole charge per kg. In case of histosol, it varies from 110 to 170. In case of vertisol, it is 33 to 67. In case of andesol, volcanic origin, you can see it is 13 to 49. Spodosol 2 to 57. In case of mollisol, high in organic matter, it is 12 to 36 centimole charge per kg. In case of inseptisols and entisols, it is 5 to 37 centimole charge per kg. In case of aridisols occurring in the arid region, it varies from 7 to 29 centimole charge per kg. Alfisol shows 4 to 26 centimole charge per kg. Altisols shows 3 to 15 centimole charge per kg, and oxysols, which are dominated by iron and aluminum, shows 2 to 13 centimole charge per kg. So, you can see the variation of cation capacity in different types of soil based on their composition. In case of oxysol, it is lowest because presence of iron aluminum oxides, which only show limited cation capacity due to pH dependent charge, that too in acidic soil condition, and that too in alkaline soil condition, because in alkaline soil condition they develop negative charges in their edges, and as a result of that they produce the cation capacity in the alkaline range. However, in case of histosol, you see it is producing the highest. It is quite obvious because histosols are known to contain basically the histic hepipedon, which is basically organic matter, decomposed undecomposed organic matter. So, these histosols, which contain huge amount of organic matter, obviously will have highest CEC among all the soil orders. Okay. So, based on that also we can estimate the catenation capacity from mineralogy. Let us see one example. So, the dominant clay in mollisols are likely to be 2:1 type of clay, such as vermiculite and smectite. Okay. So, thus the average catenation capacity of the clays of these type basically to be about 100 centimole charge per kg per clay. So, at pH 7, the CEC of organic matter is about 200 centimole charge per kg. So, since 1 kg of this mollisol basically contains 0.20 kg, that is 20% of clay and only 4% of organic matter, we can calculate the CEC associated with each of these sources. So, from the clays, in the mollisol, we know that is if we have only 20% of clay. So, from the clays in the mollisol, we should have 100 multiplied by 0.2, that is 20 centimole charge. In case of organic matter in this mollisol, we will have 0.04 multiplied by 200 centimole charge per kg, 8 centimole charge. So, basically the total CEC of the mollisol will be 20 plus 8, that is 28 centimole charge per kg of soil. That is quite obvious. Basically, we are just multiplying it with the content, individual content, and then we are basically summing their centimole of charge. Now, another problem could be, assume that a soil contains 60% clay and 4% organic matter, and the pH at the pH of the soil is 4.2. So, the acidic soil. So, you also know that the CEC is around 5.8 centimole charge per kg. Now, you want to estimate the types of clay present in the soil. So, obviously, at pH 4.2, the CEC of the organic matter would be comparatively low, about 100 centimole per kg, because you know in the acidic condition the pH dependent charge basically generate positive charge. So, when there is a positive charge, obviously the cationation capacity will be less. So, in the positive in the pH of 4.2, that means in acidic condition, CEC generated by organic matter would be comparatively low. In general, it is from 200 centimole per 200 centimole charge per kg. However, in case of acidic condition, you can see here it is only 100 centimole charge per kg of soil. So, therefore, we estimate the CEC from organic matter in 1 kg of soil. So, we can get 0.04 kg of organic matter, because 4% organic matter we know, and from the 4% organic matter or 0.04 kg of organic matter, we will have a total 4 centimole charge, which is centimole of charge generated from this only 4% organic matter. Now, the remaining, we know that total total CEC is 5.8. Among this 5.8, 4 centimole charge is basically contributed by organic matter. So, the remaining portion of the CEC will be contributed by the clay. So, obviously, what is the remaining portion? If we subtract 4 from 5.8 centimole charge, we will get 1.8 centimole charge. So, this 1.8 centimole charge will be contributed by the soil, by the clay minerals which are present in that soil. Okay. Now, since this 1.8 centimole charge per kg soil is provided by 6.60 kg of clay, that is 60% of 1 kg of soil, we have already assumed that it contains 60% clay. So, if we assume that 1 kg of soil contains 60% of the clay, then we can estimate what will be the CEC of the pure clay. So, basically 1.8 centimole charge per kg, and then we have to convert it to 1 kg. So, we will get 3 centimole charge per kg of clay. Okay. So, if we get 1.8 centimole charge per 0.6 kg of clay, for 1 kg of clay we will get 3 centimole charge. So, once we calculate this 3 centimole charge, then we have to tally with the with the table, and we can see that it could be either oxysols or it could be either ultisols. Okay. So, basically in case of oxysols, it is very low. So, we can assume that this soil may contain either oxysols or ultisols. So, this is how we can calculate the cation exchange capacity, and based on the calculation of the cation exchange capacity, we can infer which type of clay mineral or which type of soil order is basically present, or in other words, based on the CEC calculation, we can predict the soil order. Now, let us discuss another important term, very important term as far as the soil fertility is concerned. Now, that is called percent base saturation. In the short form, we call it BS. The percent base saturation is basically the percentage of CEC that is occupied by the basic cations. So, what are the basic cations? So, the basic cations are basically calcium, magnesium, sodium and potassium. So, these 4 are the main basic cations which are present in the soil. Now, basic cations are distinguished from the acid cations H plus and Al3 plus. Now, this proton and Al3 plus are known as acidic cations. So, why we call it acidic? Why we call aluminum as an acidic cation? Because at an approximate soil pH of 5.4 or less, aluminum is present in a significant high concentration that hinders the growth of most plant species. So, when the soil contains huge amount of aluminum, it basically interferes with the root growth and it basically kills the plant. So, that is why, and this effect is more pronounced in acidic soil. So, that is why aluminum 3 plus ion is considered as an acidic cation. So, Al3 plus present in significant high concentration hinders the growth of the most of the plant species and lowers the soil pH, the greater the amount of toxic Al3 plus. That means, with the reduction of soil pH, the toxic aluminum toxicity increases because the aluminum concentration increases. Now, the soils with a high percent base saturation are generally more fertile because of three reasons. The first reason is they have little or no acidic cations, they have very little or no acid cations Al3 plus that is toxic to the plant growth. So, just opposite, when we see that aluminum 3 plus is more prevalent or dominant in the exchange complex, we cannot tell that it is high percent base saturated soil. In just opposite, in case of aluminum 3 plus is not present, then we can say that it has high percent base saturation. So, obviously, due to the absence of Al3 plus ion, the deleterious effect of aluminum on plant growth is very limited. So, that is why the higher the percent base saturation is, obviously higher, denotes higher fertility. Now, soils with high percentage base saturation have higher pH, obviously, because base saturation means basic cations are more. When there will be basic cations, the pH will be more. Therefore, they are more buffered against the acidic cations from plant roots and soil processes that acidify the soils. Now, you know that there are many processes which are growing in the soils and mediated by different microorganisms. They are either chemical reaction, either biological reaction. So, due to this biogeochemistry and all different types of dynamic reaction, there are some processes which basically which are basically acid producing processes. For example, nitrification. Nitrification is a biological process, but the ultimate end product is basically they are creating some acidic end product. Similarly, acid rain, which is a chemical type of reaction, when all the different types of sulfur dioxide, carbon dioxide and nitrogen dioxide, they basically evolve from different industrial or anthropogenesis activity, and then can go to the atmosphere and then mixed with the water vapor, they produce the acids, sulfuric acid, carbonic acids, as well as nitric acids, and they basically return to the soil in the form of by mixing with the rain, and this rain is known as acidic acid rain. And this acid rain is very deleterious. This is one of the major factor of chemical weathering. So, these acid rain also interferes with the growth of the plants. So, soils with high percent base saturation, they do not have they do not produce the in other words, the soils with high percent base saturation, they have high pH. So, they are very much buffered against this process which are producing the acidic acidic byproducts in the soil. For example, nitrification, acid rain. So, they and third point is they contain greater amount of the essential plant nutrients like potassium, calcium, magnesium for use by the plants. So, this is the reason, that is why the soils with high percent base saturation are generally more fertile than the soils with low percent base saturation. Okay. So, let us wrap up here. In the next lecture, we will talk more about the percent base saturation, how to calculate the percent base saturation. Then we will also see different numerical problems related to cation exchange capacity, and also we will start different types of different types of selectivity coefficients given for cation exchange capacity or cation exchange reactions. Thank you very much. Let us meet on in the next lecture, that is lecture 4 of week 5. Thank you.